Good afternoon. Welcome to the Appropriations Committee, Transportation and Environment Subcommittee, second hearing of the year, and I might add the best subcommittee in the House of Delegates. We are going to hear from the Maryland Environmental Service first, and then we're going to hear from the Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund. And for the Maryland Environmental Service, we will first go to Carrie Cook, who is the budget analyst for the Department of Legislative Services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Carrie Cook to present the MES analysis. So beginning on page 1, just a reminder for folks that MES is an independent, non-for-profit entity that performs projects in water and wastewater, various dredging and environmental services, as well as technical services for state agencies, as well as local and private clients. So this chart on the first page here is showing their total assets and liabilities over a several year period, as well as the revenue and expenditures each year. So you can see here that in fiscal 2023, they had a net operating income of $198,000, and their total net position was $30 million. Moving on to Exhibit 1 on page 3. This is the revenue that MES received in fiscal 2023, broken out by source. So you can see here that other state agencies represents 57% of their revenue, followed by local governments, 38%, and other private clients, as well as grants, are smaller portions there on the side. Exhibit 2 on page 4 shows their revenue for fiscal 2023 broken out by business activity type. So this is a way that MES categorizes the types of projects that they do. So you can see here that a large portion is environmental dredging and restoration, as well as water and wastewater and recycling. Moving on to page 6, Exhibit 4 is the operating expenses for fiscal 2023 to 2025. You can see similar increases that you may be seeing in other state agencies here. MES does offer increases that mirror the state personnel increases in terms of cost of living adjustments and increments, and that's just so that they can remain competitive to retain their employees. We also have substantial increases in fuel and utilities, as well as contracts, just for escalating costs due to inflation and the market. Moving on to Exhibit 5 on page 7. This is the operating expenses for the reimbursable projects only. So this is a smaller portion of the previous chart. So this is showing you those reimbursable projects that MES is performing for other state agencies. Page 8 shows you, Exhibit 6, shows you reimbursable project by agency. So these reimbursable projects MES undertakes per a BPW directive that has MES operate all water and wastewater facilities at state agencies across the state. So you can see here that the largest slice is public safety and correctional services. So this is MES operating and maintaining water and wastewater services at correctional institutes across the state. They also do substantial work for the Park Service and Department of Juvenile Services. Exhibit 7 on page 9. This is contractual projects by state agencies. So this is a new addition to the analysis this year. This is representing the projects that MES does via contract for state agencies. So you can see here that a large portion is in the port administration. They do a lot of dredging work and reuse of that dredge material, as well as with the Department of Corrections and State Highway. Moving on to personnel issues on page 10. Just a caveat here that MES does operate independently and has independent oversight over their personnel. They're not subject to DBM oversight in that regard. But I did just want to highlight their vacancy rate, which is quite low. It's 4.23%. Generally, the state overall is looking at about 10%. So I did just want to highlight here that MES is doing a very good job at hiring and retaining their employees. And finally, moving on to the issues section of the analysis, beginning on page 11. So I just wanted to do a follow-up here of the Back River wastewater treatment plant issue that we discussed at last year's hearing. So this first section just describes some background in terms of when MES staff went to Back River. They were there from March through December 2022 to support operations in Baltimore City in terms of bringing the facility into compliance with their effluent permits. So at the bottom of page 11, this new section here is regarding the reimbursement. So since MES went into Back River as an order from the MDE secretary, they were entitled to complete and total reimbursement for the city for all those associated expenses. So the city did pay MES about $614,000 for all their operating efforts. And then moving on to page 12, they were reimbursed about $5.2 million for the capital side. And so that included the equipment that MES procured, ordered, installed, and set up for the city, just to make sure that they were set up for success long term in terms of replacing some of their equipment that was no longer functional. And I also just wanted to note here that these reimbursements to cover the costs that MES expended are completely distinct from the civil penalty, which you may have seen recently in the news, that Baltimore City was liable for in terms of the permit violations, both at Back River and Patapsco. So MES got their reimbursement. They no longer have staff at the facility. The second issue here on the bottom of page 12 is the annual funding statement. So this is something that appears in the Joint Chairman's report every year, and it just sort of helps us to see the full picture of MES's finances. So Exhibit 8 on page 13 shows the undesignated unrestricted net assets, and essentially this is their fund balance. This is the funding that they have available that is not subject to various restrictions so that they have it on hand. The overhead rate is on page 14, Exhibit 9. So as you can see, there are different rates that MES charges to their clients for the different types of projects that they endeavor. These rates are uniform across all clients, whether state or local. So DLS recommends that MES just comment on the overhead rate and if there would be a possibility to charge lower rates to state clients in order to save the state funding. Exhibit 10 on page 15 is the project reserve fund balances. So these are just accounts that MES has on hand. They're associated with, in most cases, specific projects that they can dip into if they have changes in schedules or budgetary needs. They have this on hand so they don't have to go back for further budgetary action, which may cause more delays. So you can see here they had a couple of retainages and withdrawals in these funds in FY23 and 24. And the Department of Budget and Management is given a prior approval for all of these funding changes. And on page 16, DLS recommends that MES continue to provide this funding statement, again, just to paint the full picture of their finances so that we can take a look each year. And the very last item is on page 18. These are just two very brief updates for you. So the Board of Directors of MES did adopt official bylaws. This was recommended by the independent assessment of the board, which was required by the MES Reform Act of 2021. So this was sort of the last item that was not completed from that assessment. So the board did approve these bylaws in May 2023. Those can be accessed on their website. And then finally, at the bottom of page 18, this is regarding the Office of Legislative Audits. They noted a repeat audit finding for MES, and this is regarding formal project agreements. So there's reimbursable projects where MES does projects on behalf of state agencies and receives the reimbursement. There was a BPW directive that required them to have formal project agreements for these projects that MES was not in compliance with. So OLA just noted that in their audit that MES should endeavor to put these projects into writing to make it more formalized. This was a repeat audit finding, meaning it was in 2 audits in a row. The first time, right after the audit, MES did sort of have their hands full with all the extra requirements in terms of the Reform Act, so they didn't quite have the capacity to finish these agreements. So DLS recommends that they comment on the timeline for finishing those agreements and executing them, as well as the decision to consolidate these project agreements by agency. So instead of creating independent project agreements for each individual project, they said that they're going to consolidate them by agency, meaning they may have 15, 20, or more projects in one agreement. So we just wanted to get some more information from them on that. And that concludes my analysis. Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy to take any questions.
To come forward. Forgot about the mic. You also have with you the board chair?
Yes.
Who is Shelley Heller. That's right. Thank you and welcome. And I understand, how long has the Maryland Environmental Service been around?
53 years.
53 years.
Going on 54.
54 years, and Ms. Heller is the very first female chair.
That is correct.
And definitely not the last.
I hope not.
That's right. Welcome, and would you like to proceed with your response?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to you, Chair Watson, Vice Chair Edelson, and of course, thanks to Ms. Carrie Cook and the entire DLS team for their thorough work in reviewing our operating and capital budgets. It's great to be here again with you this year, and I'd just like to address briefly the 3 requests by DLS. So in regards to overhead rates, MES has got 4 drastically distinct operational groups, and some of those operational groups are closer to technical environmental services, is very close to embedded consulting, where you don't need heavy equipment. There's not a lot of road travel, to our water and wastewater group, which is spread throughout the state, where they have lots of equipment, lots of moving pieces. We have, in our water and wastewater group, a lot of the regions are more circuit rider regions. So we might have a group of operators and mechanics located at one facility, let's say Rocky Gap, but they're serving a whole geographic area. So that just causes naturally distinct overhead rates in the group. When you have some people that are stationary versus some people that are moving around, utilizing a lot of heavy equipment. So we do the best we can. We strive to continue to reduce our overhead rates to all partner clients, to the state and to our county, the counties we serve in. And we do the best we can. It's 2 years out. So it's sometimes, this last point, sometimes things like estimating how much fuel ECI will need, the correctional facilities will need. If you're doing, whether it's fuel oil, wood, those things are forecasted 2 years in advance. We try to be conservative. And of course, if we over program, then we pass the money back to the appropriate agencies. So we will continue to do our best to drive down costs and try to do as best we can to lower that overhead rate. For the second item, MES concurs with the recommendation that we send in the funding statements. And for the third item, we are moving fast and furious towards getting agreements with all the other state agencies. We believe in the advisory. It was something that that audit was prior to my tenure at MES, and we had a lot of things going on. So, but we're moving forward, and we're informed that, you know, our Attorney General's office is drafting all the agreements. They will be large agreements, and we're just looking for support from all of those client agencies to do their part to, if we're going to have an agreement, the other party has to agree. So we're just working through all of that paperwork. And I'll take any questions. I'm happy to be here before you again. And of course,
well, we liked your style on the brevity, and we do have some questions, I think. So let's see, who would like to ask the first question? Delegate Mangione.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here. Just for my own knowledge, MES, we talked a little bit about this prior, but you operate as a, I guess, quasi-government. Can you explain in a sense, because General Assembly gave you, I guess, in 1970 the permission. So how does it work, number one, with you're not a state agency, but the state gave you the permission to be an agency. So just touch base on that for just a minute so I can understand a little more.
To wear the badge, we are a state agency.
Okay.
So we were formed as a unit inside of the Department of Natural Resources. Primarily in 1970 was when the Clean Water Act was coming out, US EPA was being formed, and the legislature determined that it would be good to have an organization that was focused on water and wastewater. And that started there. Statute has been adjusted many times since and has expanded to do other environmental missions. So we're here. Sometimes you could describe us as the rapid response force in the environmental area for operational and technical work, so that when something happens, like the town of Lonaconing having a need, we're able to respond and have a senior operator there that day. And there's some special powers that the General Assembly gave to the agency to be able to, for instance, we have very secure procurement rules. However, in an environmental emergency, I have to talk to the chair of the board, but if she agrees that it's a valid environmental emergency, we can move forward and be there without asking for a formalized agreement, contract, or any other vehicle to help out a jurisdiction in the state of Maryland. So, and by the way, I'm happy to give you the MES,
for the
MES
record,
101.
I'm new to the committee and want to learn a little bit as much as I can, I guess. But no, it always tried to kind of grasp how that worked. And I guess then my next question, so overall, I guess the state makes up the majority of the revenue you take in by funding the projects that you're working on.
That's correct.
And that would be, I guess, I know the charts are in there, but that's
57%.
57.
Last year. It varies, but 57% last year in
Okay.
FY23.
And then you touched on the audits. The 79 projects, I guess, you were turning them into, I guess, 9 individual reports. Are they all different 79 individual projects, or how does that work? Why there wouldn't be an individual report per individual project?
So in the statute that formed MES, it was really, we're in charge of those agencies' water and wastewater treatment facilities. So for 47 of those years or so, that stood as the agreement for which we stood under. And we would have a budget proposed, track it monthly, and then at the end of the year, if there's anything that we didn't spend because we were more efficient, we pass it back to that agency, DNR, DBM, et cetera. That was the logic that stood for a very long time. The agreements and deciding to say start with, for lack of a better term, an omnibus agreement with the agency, and then if we can get through that with another state agency that's not used to us being in that type of relationship, to then follow it up with task by task for each of those facilities, so that it's not as though we don't have a budget for every facility every year and have all of the subcodes for that budget already listed out. It's just creating the mechanism with all the other state agencies that we interact with to say, okay, well, here's our omnibus agreement that can serve for some long time, and then here are our sub-agreements for each year, and then go through the budget process of having that reviewed and secured. So it's a process, and we're working towards.
And I appreciate that. And just real quick, Madam Chair, if you don't mind, and that, I like streamlining. Of course, I like as much government accountability as possible, I guess. And thank you for all your answers. The last question, I guess, would be a timeline for the finalization of those, I guess, 6 or 7, or I think you had 2 in waiting, but the remaining 6, I guess, agreements.
Yeah. So
and thank you.
We're trying to finish it this year, this fiscal year. There are some limitations in how fast we get responses. It's coming up with contractual agreements with lots of different parties, and we're doing our best to finish it this year.
So just to clarify, there are 9 agency, ultimately there'll be 9 agency agreements?
Yes.
Sort of master agreements?
Master agreements.
And
yes.
you have how many complete right now?
There are, I don't think there are any that are complete right now. One is complete.
Okay, so you have 1 complete, and you're trying to get the majority done in the next fiscal year or this fiscal year?
This fiscal year.
Okay. So when you're
That's the
here
goal.
next year, this time, you'll have either all of them or almost all of them complete.
My goal is to finish all of them.
Okay. That's what we want to hear.
So
Yep. Great.
I will do the best I can to get them all done.
Thank you. And thank you, Delegate Mangione. And how about Delegate Solomon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I will just piggyback on that as the co-chair of the Joint Audits Committee. We would love to see your testimony said end of this calendar year. We'd love to see them. No pressure. But thank you both for being here. Appreciate your lifelong careers in public service, both of you, and a Blair Blazer.
Hey!
It's not my district, but just next door, I'm a bunch of
Oh,
students from my who are constituents that go to Blair. So we love MCPS. I appreciated your comments on the reimbursement rate. I was going to ask specifically about that and the overhead, because I think obviously anything we can do to sort of keep things in the family to make sure that we're charging as limited amount of money to our state agencies as we can to get this kind of work done. The one topic that I did want to ask you about, and I know your agency plays a role in it, is sort of longer term, and we can follow up even more after about this. So I've heard from some folks that our state's dredging policy really is in need of some updates, that we're running out of space to put our dredge. And as we, expand potential things at the port, things at Trade Point Atlantic, are we going to need to sort of reopen, reanalyze the longer term plans for dredging in the state of Maryland? I was just curious if you could comment on that and what the role MES will play in that.
So innovative use and beneficial reuse of dredge material is the future, especially for harbor material. There's no, from what I know, there's no real risk for the bay channels with the Mid-Bay project that's starting on. That's going to give another 30 years after 2030. But, the harbor material, we need to find positive products to make and then beneficially reuse that material. And the port has many, I believe they gave out 9 innovative grants, and they're continuing on that, and they acquired the property next to Cox Creek, and we're helping them with that stabilization because it is on a hazardous site. It has some remediation issues, but they're moving forward, and they always maintain the 20-year plan. So 20 years are great, but for the long-term future for harbor material with the legacy of contaminants is that's the challenge. So but we're always there with our number one client, Port of Baltimore.
Delegate Ruff.
Madam Chair, and good afternoon to both of you. Dr. Glasson, this is Ms. Heller.
Correct.
Thank you very, very much for being here with us. I believe me and my colleague are going to want to touch on the work that MES did at Black River in supporting that wastewater plant. And I wanted to get a little more detail on how MES assisted the plant in getting back in compliance with their discharge. I'm referring to page 11, that you guys were able to help them demonstrate that the plant was eliminating the unacceptable levels of discharge. What exactly did MES do there, and how does that work? How does that process work for you guys?
So MES was ordered in, and there was language for takeover. I'd never treated it as a takeover, more as a partnership. And I worked directly with Director Mitchell at the time to smooth out that. But we had operators there. I believe the order was final over the weekend, and we had operators there, senior operators, our division chief, looking at the plant, walking the plant the next Monday. And so we cannibalized ourselves in operations for the better part of that 8-month period, and sent operators there from our various regions. They were put up there in hotels for the week, and they were there every day. We have a robust maintenance and electrician program that supports all of these state facilities, and they are housed out of, right now, out of Crownsville and BWI Airport. And those electricians and mechanics, many of whom are from that area, they did yeoman's work and fixed everything they could tear down and put back together. We used our procurement capabilities before contracts were, there was never a contract vehicle. This was all under the order with the belief that we'd be paid back. So we fronted. And so we went, and those mainly men we had a list at one point in time, just hundreds of pumps and valves, and they just fixed everything. And we rewarded them as best we could. But those operators were there for the 9 months. The electricians, mechanics kept working even into the new calendar year. And we worked on 2 major capital projects. So I saw your testimony yesterday. I saw some of the questions you asked. So when Mr. Curry was relating to PSDs being fixed, 2 of them were fixed by MES. I think that the fact that we did those and executed those as a primary need for the plant led to other PSDs being fixed by other entities. And of course, we worked on the biosolids program. And I have to give a shout out to our recently retired senior engineer, Mr. Al Razik, who did a complete mass balance on the biosolids program at Back River and worked with them to move those solids off the plant. So
those equipment repairs, that was subsequent to you guys helping them get to the positive or acceptable discharge. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out, and I don't know if my mic is okay. I'm good. No, what I'm trying to figure out is what was Baltimore City, the operators that were already there, not doing that you guys then came in and said, okay, this is how you do it, and this is how we get to acceptable discharge.
So we wrote a lengthy report that's very detailed. I haven't, it's like if you have a hit record and you want to go back and you got to play that song over and over again. I haven't read that report my mind has not been focused on Back River for the better part of a year. But, we triaged as engineers. I am a civil engineer. I'm a water wastewater engineer. So I like to think I was doing, but I'm an executive director now. But all the engineers triaged the problem, realized that the solids accumulation was the major problem. We have, as I mentioned, we have vehicles and we have other relationships with other support contractors that allowed us to execute. The state, in essence, has given us the power for environmental problems to execute things quickly. And we still try to meet MBE, we still try to do the best we can, but we can execute those solutions immediately. And that's what we did. I'd love to have a lengthy discussion about, what are some of the triage. We have lists and...
Understood. I just have one last question about the staffing. I know you guys were supporting the lack of staffing. Is there anything that you all could have done or have the ability to do to assist that plant with those staffing issues that I talked about yesterday?
Yeah.
Nationwide that are occurring.
I disagree with Mr. Curry's opinion that it's a nationwide issue. I mean, sure, there is a generational shift that's going on, but it's not every utility does not have that same problem. We have an operator and training program. I share that program with Baltimore City. I offered to do it for them or help guide them. I shared the entire description of the program with Director Mitchell at the time, and my offer wasn't taken up. So we have right this week, but next week is probably going to be different. We have a 3.7% vacancy rate in our agency, and you just have to provide the proper training and education for people, and we have a career ladder now for operators. You just have to communicate to people, and still we don't pay more than other 95 corridor jurisdictions. So operators do move once they're certified, but you have to pay a market rate and provide the training for people.
Delegate Metzger.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. You used the term just a few minutes ago, you triage the problem. Is that a nice term for Band-Aid?
I was using it as a term for evaluating a problem and then designing steps, like most impactful step you can take to improve the situation. That's what I meant by triaging.
So, okay, so let me just kind of go this direction. He took most of my questions, but the unemployment rate.
You did it to me yesterday.
Well, your turn today. The percentage of the vacancy is 4.3, and I applaud you for that. But these gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen that you've employed, were they trained before they got there, or have you folks trained them?
Most of our operators are trained inside of MES. But the operators that were sent to Back River were licensed or well down the path of our 3-year program. We didn't send any untrained operators.
I know because they're working, I believe, at CCBC to train some people.
CCBC, we work with College of Southern Maryland. We work with Maryland Rural Water.
And you're still hiring these?
We hired GED and high school graduates to come into our OIT program. We're hiring every week.
Okay. We also talked about a $5 million machine upgrades and working material. I know when I was there several years ago, before you folks took over, there was some machines that when Governor Hogan put $60-some million in renovating, when I went and talked, there was 2 machines, the $5.2 million that we're talking about, that hasn't been used in 17 years. Is that brought back into working order?
I need more specifics. I don't know. I mean, it's a very large plant. So.
Okay, the waste material, that some of those tanks weren't used in 17 years. She's shaking her head in the back.
That's my Deputy Furketic. You want to say? Deputy Furketic.
Deputy Furketic, who's one of the engineers who was out there.
Can you just please identify your full name for the record?
Yes, it's Ellen Furketic. I'm Deputy Director at MES, and I've been there for 35 years. I'm thinking that some of the solids operations were part of the problem, and that might have been what you saw. That they had only one of the 4 centrifuges working. Synagro had some issues with their pelletizer because there were too many solids that were going out in the effluent, which is one of the violations they had. And because of that, they couldn't use that water for fire suppression at the pelletizer. And that's, there's a lot of heat involved there. It's a big risk. And as you know, I mean, this past year, they had a fire there. So getting the plant in order, getting the operations in order, getting the effluent to the quality it needed to be allowed them to start using that water for the fire suppression and put that system back into service.
Thank you for that. And the final question that I have, because we're in compliance, and so to speak, and we've done all of this, what are we doing about the smell? I have people every day. I live less than a mile from the plant, and I would love to say it's getting better, but it's actually, I think, sometimes getting worse, and I know there's air quality issues there.
We left operationally a year and a month ago, and we don't really have a role in their odor program. It's just not we're not there anymore, Elliot.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to put somebody back there. Thank you, Madam.
Other questions from members? Okay, thank you so much. We appreciate you being here today, and we expect to see a lot more women chairs in the future.
Thank you, ma'am.
Next, we have the Maryland Auto Insurance Fund. And we have, our analyst is Samantha Tapia, and she will be presenting the report, and then we will have members of MAIF come forward as a panel as Director Redmer sees fit. Ms. Tapia.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. A reminder of the agency's structure. Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund, or Maryland Auto, is an independent, non-budgeted but state-subsidized agency established in 1972 to serve as an insurer of last resort for drivers in Maryland. It has 2 divisions: the insured division that subsidizes auto insurance policies for drivers who do not qualify for plans sold in the private market, and an uninsured division that handles claims filed against uninsured drivers. It operates on a calendar year basis and has an independent system of accounting, but at the start of the year, it reports estimated operating expenditures for the immediately preceding year and a projection of expenditures for the year ahead. Looking at the operating budget summary on page 1 and on in Exhibit 1 on page 2, or starting on page 2, looking ahead at calendar 2024, Maryland Auto projects an increase of $4.7 million or 15.3% to $35.7 million in operational expenditures. This is largely for new personnel and salary increases, but also includes some new operational expenditures related to the increasing volume of claims and for outreach operations aimed at educating uninsured drivers on the option of Maryland Auto. In review of calendar 2023, in January, with a projected end-of-year surplus at $9.3 million, which would have been its lowest point since the last assessment took place in 1989. Maryland Auto forecasted that the assessment threshold, which was around $14.3 million per industry standards, would be crossed during the calendar year 2023 and trigger an assessment upon financial year closeout in early 2024. Chapter 535 was passed last session to support the agency in an effort to revive the insured division surplus. This included the collection of $10.2 million in over-recoupment funds held by law since the last assessment in 1999, as well as an additional $2 million in uninsured motorist fine revenue, the existing share of which usually goes to the uninsured division. For a broader financial picture, looking at the insured division financial statement in Exhibit 3 on page 5, with higher than forecasted numbers of policies written and enforced, premium revenue increased to an estimated $93.4 million in calendar 2023. However, there was also a corresponding increase in claims incurred and an increase in other operational expenditures, leading to a net loss of approximately $12 million. With the support provided through Chapter 535, this left the surplus at approximately $20.9 million. However, this is just above an assessment threshold of approximately $19.1 million. Projected for calendar 2024 is a further increase in policies written and associated premium income to $109.1 million, along with an increase in expenditures to $126.6 million, which would lead to another net loss and reduction of the surplus to approximately $3.5 million, very well below the assessment threshold of $24.1 million. Therefore, we have an outlook similar to that of last year, but without a block of past overassessment funds to draw on. We've asked for commentary on two issues, which are policy cancellations and rate setting. Policy cancellations starting on page 10 of the analysis. Maryland Auto has reported that it manages a high volume of policy cancellations. In Exhibit 7 on page 11, the exhibit compares calendar years 2022 and 2023 in the number of policy cancellations by cancellation type. With number of policies written and enforced approximately 53 to 63% higher, there was a corresponding increase of 52% in cancellations. This included a 48% increase in the number of cancellations by Maryland Auto and a 67% increase in the number of cancellations by premium finance company request. However, it also meant a 65% increase in the amount of dollars canceled through Maryland Auto cancellations and a 90% increase in the amount of dollars canceled through finance company requests. Therefore, we've asked Maryland Auto to comment on the impacts of cancellations on financial projections, on the relationship between claim risk and policy cancellations, and on whether higher risk, higher premium policies are more frequently canceled. and looking at rate setting, starting on page 12. Exhibit 8 on page 13 graphs a measure of rate adequacy for different regions of Maryland for the calendar years 2018 through 2023. The inadequacy of rates was particularly high in calendar 2022, but made some improvement in calendar 2023. For example, in the Baltimore metropolitan area, 41% of costs were not covered by premium revenue in 2022, but this was lowered to 36% in 2023. All other regions saw similar or greater improvements. We've requested that Maryland Auto comment on how the number of policies in force contributes to rate adequacy and on what contributed most to an improvement in rate adequacy in 2023. In addition to Chapter 535 last year, 2023, the committees approved several report requests, which allowed for discussion over the course of the year. The Joint Chairman's report request tasked Maryland Auto with explaining the surplus decline and offering alternatives to address the problem. In that report response, Maryland Auto noted a number of causes, including combination of stock market conditions, higher inflation in the automobile industry, and increasing numbers and costs of claims in recent years. They offered a number of solutions, including a more permanent increase of Maryland Auto's share of uninsured motorist fines to 20% of total fine revenue, or new surcharges, either a 4% per vehicle surcharge for insurers in the state, which would generate around $20 million per year, or instituting a new $1 to $5 fee per vehicle registration in the state, which could generate between $5 to $26 million, depending on the size of that fee. And then, of course, assign all or part of the new revenue to Maryland Auto. The Maryland Insurance Administration, or MIA, was also tasked with evaluating and making recommendations on the Maryland Auto rate setting model and the overall financial stability of the agency. MIA's primary recommendations in the JCR submission were against the expansion of higher risk customer base and in favor of increasing rates or modifying the rate setting model at Maryland Auto or the residual market structure in Maryland. And taking a quick look at the uninsured division, in Exhibit 11 on page 17, the uninsured division is a smaller operation funded by a share of uninsured motorist fine revenue. In calendar 2023, this was roughly $4.5 million. By statute, this amount increases each year by the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers. Unfortunately, the estimated calendar 2023 financial position is different than what was projected last January. Claims incurred in 2023 were 125% higher than in 2022. Along with increases in other expenditures, total expenditures are approximately $7.6 million, resulting in a net loss of approximately $2.2 million. With a starting surplus of $1.8 million, the close-out surplus is estimated to be negative by approximately $360,000. And with similar costs and no change in income, calendar 2024 is projected to have a closing negative surplus of approximately $2.2 million. In summary, we recommend that in order to keep the committees informed on the financial status of each division, Maryland Auto submit financial statements to the committees on a quarterly basis through fiscal 2025. Apart from that, we concur with the governor's budget. I can take questions or defer to the agency for commentary. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive, and I think we'll ask the panel to come up now. We have the agency director, Mr. Al Redmer, and who else do we have coming up? Why don't you go ahead and introduce your panel, please?
This afternoon, to my right is Dave Pfeiffer, who is our Chief Operating Officer. To his right is Amy Nell, our Controller. And to her right is Sandy Dotson, our Government Affairs Manager. And behind us is Dennis Carroll, who's a contractual attorney with us, having retired from state service as former Deputy Insurance Commissioner and former General Counsel of IWIF and Chesapeake Insurance. First, I want to thank Samantha for her work on this analysis. And Madam Chair, as you said, it was comprehensive. We've met with Samantha numerous times over the last, I guess, year and a half or so, and I appreciate and have been impressed with her hard work, focus, and commitment to learning our organization and our operations. First, you know, the 800-pound gorilla is, while we won't know for certain until our financial statement audit concludes in early March, we'll have a much better idea where we are in mid-February, but we are extremely optimistic as we sit here today that we will not trigger an assessment on the industry in 2024 based on the 2023 financial statements. So we're pretty certain about that, but again, we won't be able to declare victory until March. Go ahead.
Let me just clarify. Last year at this time, we thought there might be an assessment this coming February.
That's exactly right.
And what it's turning out to just show is that you're likely not going to have an assessment this February, but what happens in 12 months?
So first, let me thank the General Assembly because our ability to avoid the assessment, as Samantha reported, was based on the legislature passing Senate Bill 530, which gave us the ability to retain $10 million over recoupment that we already had and provided an extra $2 million in funding from the uninsured motorist fines. So without those funds, we definitely would have triggered an assessment for the 2023 financial year. It's important to note that based on our current projections, we believe that there will be an assessment, barring any surprises, in 2025 based on 2024 results, and that assessment will probably equal between $3 and $5 per policy in the state of Maryland.
I'm sorry, is that per policy or per vehicle?
Per policy, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And, you know, when we...
I'm sorry to interrupt you again.
Sure.
Some insurers issue a separate policy per vehicle, and some insurers issue a policy with multiple vehicles. So I just want to make that point. So it's per policy, but for some people that will mean per vehicle.
Well, if they have one vehicle. Dave? Am I missing it?
Yeah.
Vehicles can be on separate policies for an individual. State Farm is an example.
Yeah. So, well, first let me say this. If there is an assessment, the insurance carrier is going to get a bill. Now, they don't have to add that to the bill of their policyholder. They can, but they don't have to. I believe they should just add it into their expenses like every other expense. So for an example, every carrier pays an assessment each year to the Maryland Insurance Administration. You don't see that on your bill. There are other assessments that insurance carriers pay. You don't see that on their bill. I believe the legislature should preclude that from occurring in this instance should we do an assessment. So it's going to, the math is the assessment divided by the number of, what, Sandy, do you recall? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Dennis Carroll. I'm with Maryland.
Can you please speak into the mic and identify yourself again?
Sure. I'm Dennis Carroll. I'm a contract lawyer with Maryland Auto. The assessment is based on the insurance company's premium and market share. Al was using $3 to $5 because that's what it translates into. But the actual assessment goes to Geico, State Farm, et cetera, based on their percentage of premium.
Pro rata share.
So, and they pay it, and they can, at that point, bill it to their policyholders or use it as a cost. That's the setup right now.
Correct.
So Al was trying to simplify it by going according to vehicle, but you're not going to have an assessment that says you have 3 cars, you have 3 times the assessment. It's going to be based on the premium as a whole.
We will defer that argument to later, because I will tell you that there are carriers that write a separate policy per vehicle. Okay, and then also, just to point out that your $3 to $5 estimate is just based on your projection, which could be right, could
Absolutely.
be wrong.
Yep, correct.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Please
Yeah,
continue.
No question. And when you look at it, there's only so many options that are available. So we could do an assessment on the industry to pay for those shortfalls. We could add a policy fee to every policy. We could add a fee for every car registration in the state. We could remove our restrictions so that we could write profitable business to offset the unprofitable business, or the General Assembly or the Insurance Administration could elect for us to abandon the issue of an affordability index. Those are the only options that I've been able to identify that would provide the dollars to fund those losses.
Let me just clarify again. When you say we, you're talking about the General Assembly, or you're talking about MAIF? We could.
Well, it depends on the. So let me clarify. If it's going to be a policy fee, that would be the General Assembly would have to take that action. If it would be a fee for car registrations, obviously that would be an action from the General Assembly. Removing the restrictions would be an action of the General Assembly, and abandoning the affordability, I don't believe that we could do that. The General Assembly could require us to do it, or the Insurance Administration could require us to do it. So moving on to the report, requested us to comment on 2 topics, and we have provided written testimony for both of them. The first comment dealt with cancellations and projections. Projections for us are very difficult to do to begin with, because our business is driven by the decisions made by other carriers. As I mentioned previously, we can't offer you all insurance. We only get what the standard market turns away. So it's difficult to make projections. We do obviously the best we can. So as other carriers, as their appetite for business expands, our policy count dwindles, and vice versa. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. The uncertainty in projections is much more related to those fluctuations than our cancellation rate. Our overall cancellation rate is 40 to 50%. So that really doesn't affect our projections too much. It's also important to note, though, as you look at our financials, that the high cancellation rate results in higher than desired expenses to serve these policyholders. So obviously, when somebody cancels, there's administrative work for that. But more importantly, some of our folks, they cancel or are canceled multiple times a year. So they buy a policy, they run out of money, their policy cancels, they scrape up some more money, they get the policy again, and that churn obviously requires an extensive amount of work. The second comment was whether the number of policies we write affects the adequacy of our rates. Well, obviously that really depends. If we write somebody and they don't have any accidents, obviously that's profitable, and the likewise is also true. The big issue for our rate adequacy is our affordability index, which only applies in low-income communities. It's irrelevant in 80% of the zip codes in the state, but it's significant in the 20% that we do have the affordability cap. And we are trying to get as adequate as we can. So we did a personal rate increase in August, followed by a commercial rate increase. We have one pending in February. We're going to do another one mid-year. But again, these increases are capped in low-income communities where we have the affordability index. Samantha also mentioned that we might want to comment just generally on auto industry trends around the country. And nationally, claim losses were about $3.8 billion. In 22, it was over 26 billion, 3 billion to 26 billion. And then for the first half of 23 was 24 billion, just in the first half. Auto repair costs have increased 20% from 22 to 23, and that's, the inflation of auto parts, supply chain issues, et cetera. There's also increased frequency and severity. So, for insurance speak, frequency is how often are folks hitting things. And then obviously the severity is, well, how significant is the damage? And the severity, that's been the biggest driver over the last couple of years, increasing 163% from 2019 to 23. And you only need to drive along I-97 to see why. People are driving faster, they're driving crazier. There's been significant rate increases nationwide. Average of 24% in 2023, 29% from 22 to 21. And as I mentioned, we took an 11% increase in August. We've got 6% in February. We're going to do another one in mid-24, except again, we are holding the line in 20% of those zip codes where we have the affordability index. For perspective, if we were to be rate adequate in the Baltimore metropolitan area, that would be an increase of 43%. Again, and these are folks in low-income communities. The biggest driver of our rate increases, and then we see this again around the country, is the tightening of underwriting standards. Carriers are losing historic amounts of money around the country. As a result of that, they needed to fix their financials. So they did that by avoiding risk. So they stopped appointing new agents. Look at the number of Geico insurance commercials you see today compared to 3 or 4 years ago. You don't see anywhere near the number of commercials because they don't want our business. They need to fix their finances first. They're deliberately avoiding new business. If you read the transcripts from earning calls from these national carriers, they all have dramatically altered their marketing expenses to avoid new business so that they can clean up their losses. Moving on to the analysis itself, looking at Exhibit 5. The number of policies we have doubled in the last 18 months, and I'd like to give you a narrative to go along with the graph. So think back to 2020, COVID. The state was closed. Nobody was driving. The roads were empty. And if you're not driving, you're not hitting things. And all around the country, carriers ended 2020 flush with cash. And Business 101 is if you've got a lot of cash, you have to deploy it somewhere. So what they did was they lowered premiums around the country. More importantly for us, they liberalized their underwriting. They were taking higher risk drivers. They were taking risk in 21 and 22 that they normally would not have taken. So if you look at the chart, you'll see that our policy count dwindled each and every month until about the middle of 2022. And the reason is the country opened back up, people started driving, the demolition derby was on again. They were driving faster, they were driving crazier, and all these losses started to hit. Carriers around the country were losing historic amounts of money. So again, they tightened their underwriting. They're now not writing risk that they would have written. That risk has to come to us. There's nowhere else for them to go. And that's why you'll see our policyholder count doubled over an 18-month period, not from anything that we did, but because the other carriers in the market didn't want those risks. And if you look at the claim costs in Exhibit 10, we write business disproportionately in low-income communities. That means there's going to be more fraud than there would otherwise be. I mentioned driving crazy, driving fast. If you're driving fast, you're hitting things harder than you would have, which dramatically increases the damage to the vehicles and the damage to the people, which causes the significant increase in bodily injury claims. The cost of materials and who would have expected or anticipated the significant increase in car thefts and carjackings over the last 12 months? Well, who pays for that? The auto industry pays for that. And again, most of that occurred in urban areas. That's where we write a lot of our policies, so we were disproportionately affected. And on page 12, related to the affordability index, Samantha notes that this complicates our effort to maintain surplus. It does, but raising rates in low-income communities, we believe, is contrary to our message, our mission. Our affordability indexes, we look at each zip code in the state, we look at the median income, and we strive to cap our premiums at 2.9% of that median income. So we're losing 30 to 40 cents on every dollar in those communities. And we believe that if we didn't do that, the percentage of uninsured drivers would increase exponentially. Now, we talk about doing an assessment. When you go home, look at the amount of money that you pay for uninsured motorist coverage and think what would happen if that number is going to increase 5% or 10% or 15% because of an increase in uninsured drivers on the road. Finally, we believe that our affordability index is the only tool that's currently available to moderate the number of drivers that are uninsured. And it's only on liability coverage. It's not on comp and collision. I personally believe, many of us believe, that the affordability index should be applied to comp and collision in addition to liability. But currently that's not the case. And then finally, Madam Chair, I just want to comment on Samantha's recommendation that we provide quarterly financial statements, and we're happy to do it. Obviously, we do quarterly financial statements anyway. The only thing we'd like to do is bump the dates back a couple of weeks. So as an example, in June 24, we would like to have the quarterly statements produced at the end of July 31st. That way it allows us to appropriately close out the books for the previous month for the quarter and make sure that the numbers are as accurate as possible. So that would be July 31st for the first and second quarter, October 31st, and then March 15th and May 15th. And we're happy to provide that in writing and happy to answer your questions.
Did you address the uninsured portion in your remarks?
I did not. Is this in our written testimony? Uninsured? No.
To clarify, there are two divisions. One is the insured, and that's everything you just talked about.
That's right.
We also have the uninsured division, which directly affects this committee because, and you can explain why. Can you please explain to the committee what the uninsured division is and how it works and what the status of that is?
Yes, thank you. I apologize, and that should have been part of our written testimony and prepared remarks. So the uninsured division, the insured division is funded typically by premiums and investment income, those kinds of things. The uninsured division is funded by fine money from the uninsured motorist fine. And this part of our operation is if an individual is hit by an uninsured driver and they have no collectible insurance themselves. So think about somebody, they don't own a car, they don't have insurance, they're walking across the street, they're a pedestrian, they're hit by an uninsured motorist. We will step in on behalf of the state. We will pay claims on their behalf, and then we will seek to recover that money from the guilty uninsured driver. And if you look at the financials, we are projecting a deficit in the surplus at the end of 2024. And if you look at the report that Samantha did, we saw a significant increase in the amount of claims in 2023. And I believe that that's a result just in the general increase in the number of uninsured drivers that we have on the roads.
So on the uninsured, the bottom line for the uninsured drivers portion, last year, did you receive assistance from the Maryland General Assembly?
So we received our normal $6 million.
That comes from what?
That comes from the uninsured motorist fine money. In addition to that, we received an additional $2 million, which was earmarked to go to the insured division to avoid an assessment.
Okay.
Yes.
So this coming year, do you anticipate that you will need more than the percentage of the uninsured motorist fine that you are now entitled to?
We, in order to avoid a deficit surplus, we would need some.
And how much is some?
Gonna have to go. Sandy, do you know that offhand?
Well, the uninsured, I mean, one of the issues this year was, as Samantha mentioned, the claims incurred in 2022 was 1.2 million. This year it's estimated at almost 3. And we have no way of knowing what's coming in. It's just any Maryland resident can claim there. So I'll, I guess, Amy more about the projections on the claim side.
Vision where you'll know by February?
Around mid-March.
Okay, so what does it look like now, to the best of your ability?
For 2023, it looks pretty close to the projections in Exhibit 11, about 300-some thousand deficit in surplus.
Okay.
That's subject to, of course, whatever the claims, our actuarial estimates end up being for the end of the year, which is what's pending.
Okay.
So subject to that, and then in 2024, the trends sort of continue, but as Sandy mentioned, uninsured claims activity is extremely volatile and difficult to predict, so the trending for 2024 follows 2023 essentially.
Right, so I guess what we as a committee are trying to figure out is, you say you need more money in the uninsured division, the victims fund, and to be, we don't want to be just piecemealing it every year, we want it to be more sustainable. So what is it that you're asking of the budget committee to increase in terms of total funds from now into the future on the uninsured? And you may not know that off the top of your head, obviously, but we really need to know that. So I know you're saying you're going to be $300,000 in the hole, you think, in March for the year that's expiring. But where are you going to be the next few years, and how much more do you think you need from us to make that victims fund sustainable? That make sense?
Yes.
It does.
We'll provide that information.
With that, I'm going to open it up to questions, and I think I will start with Mr. Metzger this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming and sharing. I've got a couple of questions. In my area, in Essex, in Dundalk, I've been seeing a lot of Virginia tags. And the Virginia tags, as I've been told, they spend $600 and they don't have insurance. So when that person has that accident, that goes to the victim fund. And that's what's depleting from Maryland Insurance Policy Company. So if we can figure out a way to, with these Virginia tags, because they pay $600 and that's it. How do we handle that?
So there's a couple of things. First, the Virginia General Assembly passed legislation last year that I believe is effective in July of this coming year that will eliminate that provision. So folks will not be able to avoid buying insurance in Virginia. The other point I'll make is if that uninsured motorist hits somebody with no insurance that's walking across the street, well, that comes to the uninsured division. If they hit you in your car and you have injuries or damage, that's going to be paid by your insurance carrier under the uninsured motors.
And that's kind of where my point was going, because if that happens enough, our rates are all going up.
Absolutely.
So that's where we need to put a stop gap in that.
Absolutely.
So,
thank you.
Delegate Ruff.
And thank you to the panel. So my understanding is that MAIF, the insured division, is like the last resort for the folks who have had issues in the past, multiple accidents, not having insurance, lapses in their insurance. That is your mission, right? To provide insurance coverage for those folks in that. Would you say that's a small bracket of folks?
It is, yeah. We insure less than 1% of the market. So, yes, that is a small number.
How many policyholders is that?
39,000?
Right, just under 40,000.
Okay. And you would agree that you guys have established policies on how you onboard and issue new policies to Maryland drivers. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is that publicly available anywhere, those policies?
The policies?
Yeah, like you just said that you established policies on how to onboard new policies to the MAIF insurance program, right?
So our policies are filed with the Insurance Administration.
Got it. So do you think that that's publicly available anywhere?
I think specifically the criteria you use to accept a new motorist.
Right.
That's
Where? Okay, and how you verify that when they come in the door, and then how do you continue to verify that? Is that what you're asking, Delegate Ruff?
Yes.
Can you explain how that happens?
So currently, somebody comes to us through an independent agent or some producer that is 1,400 of them that we represent. Part of their evaluation, they determine whether or not the person has been turned down by 2 carriers, canceled by 1, or there's been a lapse in coverage. They can't get coverage. They certify or verify that that has occurred. We take that information, and then based on that, we will write policy. So as long as they do that, or the person goes online, they have to check a box that says, I have been turned down, canceled. They can write in there who they were.
It's also important to note, we don't sell insurance directly to any policyholders. Every policy we have is sold and or serviced by an independent producer, not an independent, by an insurance producer.
And so you guys accept the information, essentially the investigation of those insurance producers. Is there an audit process or a contemporaneous process of you all, essentially, is there any trust and verify system?
So that wouldn't be something we do. Obviously, the Insurance Administration could do that, but no, we do not.
So is it safe to say that if those insurance providers, those 1,400, if there are organizations in there that are not performing their due diligence, you would not be aware of that?
We would probably not unless something bubbled up on the back end, but I would point out that insurance producers, they get paid more by placing the business someplace else. So I find it hard to believe that they would place it with us when they could be placing it somewhere else.
Generally, our premiums are higher than almost everybody in the market. Generally, the folks that come to us are looking for these expensive options. So, we're not. It wouldn't be their best.
Okay, thank you.
And let me just follow up with that. Those are very good questions. You're not always the most expensive option, is that correct?
I doubt it.
Especially, right, especially in the areas
Where
that
we have
have
the affordability index.
So sometimes you're the highest option. So are you saying you never audit your own insurance producers?
The only audits that we have done have been when customer service issues have popped up.
So to Delegate Ruff's point, you wouldn't know if that is the case, what we talked about in terms of verification. So some carriers in the excess and surplus lines market require a statement or actual copy of a declination before they will write the policy. Do you require any kind of verification, written verification, or something signed by the agent that says these are the two companies that have declined this insured?
So we do get certification. Go ahead.
Application, and it has certified, I believe is at the bottom of the application, that they've been turned down.
Do they specify who turned them down?
They have to write the names of the carriers, Delegate,
And
Chair Watson.
And do your underwriters review that?
There's no, I guess, proof that I've been turned down by, I'm just going to, X, Y, or Z carrier. That's the way it's always been. If you go to one producer, he's going to write for X carriers. If you have an independent, he'll probably write from 4 to 5 carriers. They're going to look at our policyholders' driving record, motor vehicle record, and will more than likely, they will know whether they're qualified for the carriers they write for, or they're going to be turned down by.
Okay. All right, I understand.
The other requirement too, excuse me, Chair Watson, is if you're just canceled by one carrier or non-renewed, then you don't have to meet the 2 turn down. I hope that helps.
It does. Okay. So last question before I turn it over to someone else. How do you graduate from MAIF once you're in it?
So you come in, each year you are rewritten. There's not an automatic renewal. So the policyholder, 60 days prior to their expiration of their current policy, receive a notice. That will have their, I believe that's correct, their new premium on there. They'll work with their producer, and eventually the person will move along. By the 3rd year, if they're still with us, let's just say you have a driving accident and a motor vehicle citation. That's going to be on your record for 3 years. So after 3 years and you're still with us, then at that point we have to send you a letter telling you you're eligible for the private market, and this is by statute. Give them the Maryland Insurance Administration's rate guide, a link to that. Tell them to talk to their producer. And then if they still can't find insurance in the private market, they have to recertify that they've been turned down again by 2, and then they can come back. But my understanding is by the time you're there, that part of our business is very, very small percentage, that the producer has moved that person to a standard carrier. It's to the policyholder's advantage to go to move on. We're there, as we always say, to bridge the gap to standard market.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Delegate Hellman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all. I just had two questions. What's the collection rate, and how does that work for you going after guilty parties who don't have insurance when you're recouping the costs?
Sure. So this is in Exhibit 11. So the collection rate, I don't have that percentage for you, but there is a very large portion over the years. These judgments have gone through the courts and end up collectible to the uninsured division. And that's if, the driver that caused the accident was not a phantom driver and couldn't be located to begin with. They moved to the judgment process and were able to pursue collection. We worked those cases. A significant chunk of the population that we would be seeking collection or reimbursement from is incarcerated. There are also a number of cases, significant chunk, that the person who caused the accident goes into bankruptcy, and the debt is not discharged, but it makes it a lot more challenging, obviously, to collect if you have that kind of situation. So I don't have an exact rate for you, but over the years, the collections has declined in recent years in conjunction with, I think it was in 2020, it went into effect through law that licenses were no longer suspended for unpaid debts to the uninsured division. And we've seen with that, and with the economic situation post-COVID, some of the collections declining.
Okay. I'd be curious to see the historic trend over that, if you could provide it to us. And then the other question I had is around the affordability piece that you mentioned, Mr. Commissioner, Executive Director, excuse me. So you said it's 2.9%. Do you have sort of a range of options? Obviously, there's a big gulf between eliminating the affordability index completely and tweaking it. Like if we moved it to 3.9%, if we moved it to 4.5%, what would be the increase in revenue collected with a modified affordability index as opposed to the 2.9%?
So the one thing I'll tell you is nationally, what you pay for auto insurance as a relationship to median income is closer to about 1.8 to 2%. We've already gone to a 2.9 because of, in one case, partly because of the increased amount of accidents and thefts and things that we have.
Well, can I just stop you for a second? When you say it's 1.9%, is that for this population of insured?
No, this is
okay. Yeah,
this is for the average.
Right, but that's not an apples to apples comparison.
No, but my point is we increased the number above. We didn't want to use the average of 1.9 because that takes in everybody.
Right.
So we did move it. We moved it up to 2.9. There's no other information that we could get as to just, let's say, folks that are in the assigned risk pools in other states. But yes, we could look to move that up. I will tell you that we look at that every couple of years. And does this make sense? Should we move it? We had moved it about 2 years ago. It was about 2.5 when we moved it up to 2.9.
So we're in the process of closing the books for 2023. When we have the 2023 numbers, we're going to be looking at beginning the actuarial work for a rate filing that will occur probably sometime around the middle of 2024. So what we will do as we walk through that process, we will do some pro formas of saying, okay, well, what happens if we move it to 3.5% or 4% or what have you, and you'll be able to see those numbers, and we'll provide that to the appropriate committees before we do a rate filing.
And so you said that would be the end of the fiscal year this year? Or end of
calendar?
calendar?
We're closing out the books now for the end of 23.
The end of 23.
Once
okay.
we get that cleaned up, we're going to begin working on the next filing. So it would be, early spring.
Okay. Do you know off the top of your head how much that move from 2.5 to 2.9 brought in? Obviously, it'd be different today, but
it would really depend on looking at all the different territories, how it affects the territories. I wouldn't have that number now.
Okay.
So we can tell you what the financial impact would be to us. What we can't tell you is, and I'll exaggerate the point, if we went from 2.9% to 5%, what would that do to the number of uninsured drivers?
Yep.
And we can't make that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Look forward to getting that information. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Mangione.
Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the committee. Always good to see you, Director Rimmer. So just to clarify, so for my own knowledge, you said it's more expensive for the premiums for high-risk motorists. That's if they're above a certain income? Is that how that works?
So when we do our rate analysis, we look at where we're writing our business, what the claims are in those geographic areas, and how much rate we need to get based on drivers' classifications and so on to be adequate. And then we're gonna file to do an appropriate rate increase, but we will hold the increase in those areas where we have the affordability index that exceeds that 2.9%.
Okay, how many of you, I guess, the 39,000 would you think were of lower income status that you insure, opposed to those who are just high-risk driving?
Yeah. So we have an affordability index cap in 20% of the zip codes. Do we know what percentage of the policies are? We'll get that information.
That's fine.
And get it back.
That's an excellent question, because that'll help us understand better. So just to recap that question, make sure we got it right. It's what percentage of your 39,000 policies fall within the affordability index?
Yeah, we do have that information, but not with us, and we'll get that to the committee.
Well, you said 20%, right?
Well, it's 20% of the zip codes.
Right. Okay.
I
so
don't
we
know
want to know
about
how many.
the policies.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just last question, you had mentioned, I think you said has come back to the General Assembly, something about registrations. I guess you meant if, MDOT increases registration fees, then we would have to say direct some of that to you.
I was just trying to identify
just a way to raise
to
more.
avoid an assessment. What are all of the possibilities? And those are a couple of the possibilities. And again, the General Assembly would have to act.
To avoid an assessment, or were you saying those possibilities are for the uninsured motorist deficit?
No, it was to avoid an assessment.
Okay, because I don't think we have ever said that we're interested in funding, the insured division or subsidizing the insured division indefinitely. Last year was supposed to be a Band-Aid to a better
Correct.
solution.
But I've received that question multiple times, so I just
I think it's directed towards the uninsured division. So yeah.
Well, I guess the theme to my question, that maybe you would know this in general, maybe Madam Chair would know it, and it's on topic, but also a little different, is if registration fees, that's not something the General Assembly in general vote on. That's an MDOT thing? That if they wanted to raise that?
I'm going to plead ignorance. I don't recall.
Okay. Well, then that follows on my last question, I guess, and I can find that out. I'm just curious for my own knowledge, is what happens, so if you do, trigger the assessment, how does that actually go down? Because, I think that's all a concern of ours as elected officials. We don't want to hear the grief from, rightfully so, from constituents, but how does that go about, and is that something that ultimately comes back to a vote, or is that something that the insurance administrator just kind of does it with the carriers?
It's already in statute.
Okay.
Again, the provision of the statute, though, that if I were a legislator, I would be concerned about is how the carrier recoups the money that they spend with the assessment. So again, if it's an insurance administration assessment or any other assessment or any other expense, their payroll, their rent, everything else, that all gets bundled up in their expenses and is passed along to the consumer in the next rate filing. I believe that if there is an assessment, that should be treated the same way, as opposed to allowing the carrier to tack a $2, a $3, or $4 charge on your policy.
Okay. So in other words, a citizen could see the effect of this without it ever having been voted on by the General Assembly in the coming years. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, and would you just explain exactly that when the trigger happens and then the next steps, just so people understand how it actually happens?
Sure. Our board certifies our financial statements in March of each year. So if we trigger an assessment, what that means is the assessment formula is in statute. We have to have a certain surplus, an amount of dollars to pay future policyholder claims. And whatever that amount is, we need to have that surplus or more. If we fall below that, we trigger an assessment. An assessment is where each insurance company will receive a bill based on their market share. Now, that's going to be, so if it's 23, it would be the summer of 24, as an example. And they'd have to pay a percentage based on their share of the market share. And again, they have the ability to just build it into their rates like they do every other expense, or they can tack it on to your policy as a line item charge.
It's almost like a condominium assessment.
Mm-hmm.
But how many states have this type of arrangement where the insurance company can add a surcharge to a policy in that manner?
I'm going to let Dennis come up because he's looked at it very closely, but I'll say we're the only state that has a mechanism like MAIF. However, every state does something, and let me tell you, the other states, I don't know that any of them have gone 30 years without kicking in some kind of an assessment.
Generally, the assessments with the assigned risk pools, they're not allowed to bill back to policyholders. And I know that from the organization at APSO, which runs the assessments throughout the country.
But we do not have an assigned risk pool, right?
No, we don't.
Right. So what our program is very unique to the state of Maryland.
Very unique.
Okay.
There are some other states that have different arrangements than assigned risk pool. There's discounted rates in New York, for example. There's several states, but
Right.
no state has created a statutorily created insurance company to handle the residual market like we have.
Right. That's the point I wanted people to understand. And of
Right.
course, those are really policy decisions made by another committee.
Mm-hmm.
But we're involved because we have to make sure that we understand the budget implications of both of your divisions. Do you have any further questions? All right, great questions. And now we go to my vice chair, Delegate Edelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great to see you all. Thank you so much for the presentation. Can you give us a sense, in your opinion, of what led to the improvement in rate inadequacy in 2023?
The improvement in rate adequacy in 2023, probably two things: the rate increases that we took in those areas where there is no low affordability index. The other thing is our efficiency and effectiveness in settling claims, I think, has improved dramatically in the last couple of years. Dave, anything else you'd like to add to that?
The increase, as you heard, there's an increase in the actual cost of claims, but we have managed our overall claim expense down significantly in prior years. That's helped us manage the expense of handling all of these claims.
Okay. Do you have a sense of those two, which one was more impactful, and if related to the ability to settle claims, do you see that to be a continuing thing that will continue to improve and
Sure, but
rate adequacy?
the settlement of the claims is the small number. The big number is how much the claims are for to begin with. And so in 2024, and I shouldn't speculate, but I will, I think our rate adequacy will improve a bit, because if you look at the rate increases we took in 2023, they weren't effective until the second half of the year. So if you're increasing somebody's premium $120, just to use that number to make it easy, we're only getting $10 per month for 4 or 5 months. In 2024, we'll be getting that $10 for all 12 months, and then we're going to do another increase as well. So that'll improve incrementally.
So barring something completely unexpected happening in the markets this year or in the amount of claims that get filed, I think the general consensus is that in 2025, we're very, very likely to have an assessment for the period ending December 31st, 2024. Would you agree with
Correct.
that? Okay. And the MIA, and candidly, I think I'd say most of us, see that as a problem that needs to be solved. Am I correct that you do not see that as a problem that needs to be solved, meaning having an assessment is just an expected way that this market should work, that once in a while there just needs to be an assessment to occur in order to keep things moving along, as opposed to the fact that we are almost definitely going to have an assessment is a problem that we need to solve?
So the legislature created us 50 years ago, and they created the assessment mechanism as the way to fund our operations and our drivers. As Dennis said, insurance carriers pay into the cost of difficult to insure drivers all over the country. So this is not anything new. It's nothing surprising. Where I differ with the Insurance Administration is, well, first of all, the Insurance Administration could require us to raise our rates today in low-income communities. At this point, they haven't done that. I believe that it is the only mechanism for us to moderate the number of uninsured drivers that are out there. I read the MIA report. I disagree with it. To suggest that we could go into the Baltimore metropolitan area and raise rates 30 or 40% and not have a dramatic increase in the number of uninsured drivers is, I just don't agree with that theory.
Okay. One of the other things that the MIA recommended was better enforcing the existing regulations regarding eligibility. Can you give us a sense of your take on that?
They have that authority now, and they can enforce it. They can do audits of every producer that we have. My understanding is they have done some audits in the past. For people to certify that information is correct, that happens in almost every business every day. So why we would want to treat this differently, I don't know. But if the Insurance Administration has concern as to whether producers are following the rules and the regulations, that's their authority. And,
So you don't see that as a recommendation that could apply to Mayfield?
Not unless somebody wants to mandate us to do it, but, to take time, energy, and personnel to do those kinds of audits, we're happy to do it if folks want us to do it, but that's going to incrementally increase our cost of doing business, which is going to increase the difficulty of our financial challenges going forward.
So, I get that. That makes sense. So let's talk about the affordability index a little bit. I want to make sure that I fully appreciate that. Is it correct that for all of your policies you have an affordability index, but that there is a cap that applies in the 20% of zip codes that you have in the lower income areas?
So I don't know that I would describe it that way. We look at each zip code. We look at the median income. And again, our objective is to limit premiums for liability-only insurance, to 2.9% of their that median.
Right, but that is a decision that you make internally.
That's
right?
correct. That's correct.
So because earlier you said things like abandoning the affordability index would require a legislative step. But what I'm hearing you say now is that's an internal index that you set, that you have the ability to
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I'll point out that if you are a drunk driving attorney from Potomac, you're paying a whole lot of money for your Maryland auto policy. If you happen to be in a low-income community, not so much.
But I just want to make sure I have this right. When you talk about a cap that you have, that is a self-appointed cap on yourself.
That's correct.
So you could choose to lift that cap at any time?
We could, sure, go ahead.
The statute that the General Assembly passed said that our rates are supposed to be determined by the commissioner, taking into account traditional rate making, excessive, not discriminatory, et cetera, but also take into account the purposes of the fund. And when that part was added to the statute, the preamble of the bill explicitly said that in determining our rates, the rates have to be affordable for Maryland Auto. And we have been doing this for decades in various formats, but considering affordability is part of the statute.
Of course, but it's your determination of what is affordability and
Yes.
how you create
Yes.
an index and how you cap it in
Correct.
certain zip codes. That's purely an internal analysis
It
and
is, but
decision that you do.
we do have to consider affordability. That's all I'm saying.
Sure, but understood, but there are many different ways to consider affordability. Right. Okay.
And as I mentioned previously, as we prepare the work for the actuarial work for our next rate filing, we will provide different pro formas of what it would look like if we arbitrarily increased the affordability index.
Okay, and then my final question is about the sort of doomsday projection of the amount of uninsured drivers that would be on the roads if your rates increase substantially. Do you have any numbers to assess what that might look like, or is that just sort of, if we increase the rates, there will be uninsured drivers?
Correct.
On the roads?
Again, I think if you look at any industry, at some point, as you raise costs, folks bail out of the marketplace. I will not even begin to speculate what would occur in metropolitan Baltimore if we increased rates 30 or 40%. I can't even project on what that would look like.
And similarly, you couldn't project what it would look like if you raised rates 5% or 7.5% or 10%.
Correct.
Thank you, Delegate Nielsen. I have a few questions just based on the conversation, and these aren't necessarily connected. So, but you did mention that the General Assembly, however many years ago, set up this assessment mechanism as a way to fund MAIF. So how long ago did we have our last assessment?
30 years.
So for 30 years, MAIF was able to be self-sustaining and fund itself. Okay. What percentage of your MAIF customers carry physical damage insurance and not just liability?
5%.
Well, that's premium.
Premium.
It's about 39% of the policy.
So 39% of your policies carry physical damage?
We call it, full coverage.
Full coverage, yeah, okay. How do you pay your producers who give you the business?
Commission.
By statute.
And is there a straight commission for everybody? And what is that commission?
10%.
So you pay 10% to any agent who provides you a policy, regardless of how many policies they give you per year. There's no other kind of profit sharing. Okay.
There's no profit.
Statute is 10 to 15%. We're down to
The bare bottom.
the bare bones.
So the uninsured motorist fine, as I understand it, is $150 a day, plus for each subsequent day that you don't have insurance, $7, up to a maximum of $2,500. So someone who does not have insurance and gets caught could be charged with that $2,500 fine if they don't have insurance for however many days, right? Or they don't have insurance ever. They then are assessed a fine of $2,500. Who collects that fine?
Motor Vehicle Administration.
Okay, and do you have any sense of what percentage of people pay that are assessed a fine?
So, Chair Watson, I know totals. So, for example, in fiscal year that just ended, 2023, they collected a total of $58 million. Prior years, bear with me, I do have that with me. They've collected 70 to 80 million. It just depends on the year.
So we can ask them what percentage of people actually pay the fines. You wouldn't have that information, but it's
No.
good to know how much they collect. So $2,500 max, what's your average premium for your policyholder?
2,800.
Right. So what's the incentive of someone who is caught without insurance? What is the incentive to buy insurance to cure that? Because the insurance is $2,800 and the fine is $2,500, which is why you have said we need to increase the uninsured motorist fine.
Yep.
But I think what we as a committee want to do is talk to MVA about who's paying those fines and what percentage are being paid and what happens to people who don't pay the fines. I think that's something we need to follow up on. You, in the past, have had an amnesty program, I think. And can you explain to the committee what that is?
That started before I arrived. I hit the tail end, so I'm going to punt this in.
That's it in committee. It was created by legislation in 2018, and the goal was to generate funds for specifically the uninsured division. What it did was people that had a delinquent uninsured motorist penalty fine. So let me roll back. If I have a fine, let's just say it's $1,000, and I don't pay it, eventually MVA turns that over to CCU for collection, and then CCU tries to collect, they set up payment plans, et cetera. What it did was created a program that for a certain period, so it wasn't people that were newly uninsured, but it's like if you're delinquent by, I think it was 2016 and prior, then they would waive, you signed up for the program, waived 80% of the fine, you paid 20%. And part of that joining the program was if you joined the program, you had to then maintain insurance for, depending on the amount of fine, for 6 months or a year, to get the waiver of 20%. I believe, and I could be wrong, about 20,000 people signed up for that, participants, and I could have the numbers wrong. And it generated about $8 million. There were administrative costs to that, but I think we netted about $5 million. We set up a online program where people could join and make payments, and it was very successful.
The MVA administered it, or you administered it?
We did. The uninsured, we were tasked with administrating it.
And it was only a one-time thing? You don't have the ability to do it again on your own?
It needs legislation. The General Assembly would have to create, reinstitute it. It's in Article 17. It's in the transportation article.
Okay.
MVA and this was something that you tasked us to talk to the MVA about. It was part of one of our reports. They didn't assess fines during the pandemic, so they thought it might be too soon, but maybe it should be done in the next couple of years, and that's what that was our recommendation.
Okay.
And I'm sure they could answer that too when they come before you.
My last question.
I provided you enough background, but it was successful.
Yeah, it's something we should definitely put on our list as an option, or tool. My last question for you was, what do you expect your combined ratio to be in 2023?
2023, I think we're going to be at 124, 125.
So less than 2022?
Yeah.
And less than 2021? Okay, good. Do we have any other questions from committee members? Yes. Delegate Eagleson. Hang on, Sandy, I'll get you.
One final bite at the insurance apple. So one of the other things that we did in 2023, based on the concern that there was going to be an assessment that would occur in 2023, was increase the amount of the uninsured motorist fine revenue that went into the insured division, right? And that's how we got to it was about $2 million, and that's how we got to the 10.2 that helped to ensure we staved off an assessment. One of the recommendations that you have made in response to the JCR report is to increase, I would assume, annually, the portion of the uninsured motorist penalty fines that go to, would it be to go to the insured division to 20%? Is that correct? Or the amount that would come to MAIF generally?
So it all goes to the uninsured division.
Okay.
That's the first stop.
Yep.
And then there can be a determination whether it's transferred to the insured division or not.
And so right now, the amount that goes to the uninsured division is 10%. Is that right?
No, it is a flat amount. Sandy?
This current year will be about 4.6, so
Okay.
it's increased by the CPI. So
Okay.
last year we got 4.3.
Okay.
And the additional 2 million. And then it's increased the following year by the CPI, and I don't know what that translates, a small percentage. It does not go up very much,
Okay.
a couple $100,000. And I would add to Delegate Edelson, Vice Chair Edelson, that when we testified last year, the additional fine money that we would receive would, again, as Al stated, it could be used to assist the insured division really to offset that rate inadequacy or used for the uninsured division. But that $2 million was really earmarked to help the insured avoid the assessment for year 2023.
I understand. And
I
so
hope
let's.
that helps.
That does, but let's assume we round it up to say 5%. The idea is the other 95% goes to the general fund. Is that right? So if we increased it to 20%, that would be about 15% of a residual that would no longer be going to the general fund. It would be going to support insured and uninsured.
Correct. So last year, that additional 20% would have given us about 14 million.
Right.
So that would have been a 10 million reduction to the general.
Right.
Anything extra that we receive is a reduction to the general.
Is it your understanding that if we did increase it to 20% this year, that would stave off the likelihood of an assessment, or do you think even with that 20%, we'd still likely have an assessment?
Just looking at the amount from the fines they collected last year was only 58 million, so there would, I think, would be an additional 7 million, so that would help, would reduce the assessment, but it wouldn't totally avoid. Let's just say the assessment amount's 17, we got an extra 7. We probably know some of that would need to stay with the uninsured to stabilize it there. So
Got it. Okay.
it doesn't totally avoid, but it could reduce the amount.
On that line, you're talking about money that's coming from the uninsured motorist fine, correct?
Yeah.
You're talking about the 17,106, the uninsured motorist
Yeah,
penalty
so
fine.
just to clarify for everyone here, that money goes to other places too. It goes to Safe Schools and it goes to the Vehicle Theft Fund. Some of it goes to MAIF, and then the rest goes to the general fund. Right. But again, my feeling is that we as a group are not going to want to be putting more money into the insured division. I think we have a very big concern about the uninsured division. And so to summarize, we need from you what you think is an amount that would help sustain the uninsured division, at least for the next, just give us 5 years projection. We also want what Delegate Mangione requested, which is the number of policyholders that are in the capped zip codes. And are you issuing policies, you're issuing one policy, multiple vehicles? But in most cases, it's one policy, one vehicle on a policy, right? Right. Okay. Members, do you have any other questions? Okay, we thank you for your work.
Appreciate
and
it.
Members, if you wouldn't mind just huddling up here for a minute, I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.